Okay, guys, so welcome back. And now we're going to start with the session before lunch. Our first speaker is going to be Karen Green from the University of Melbourne. And Karen is going to be talking about some objects of thoughts are not objects. So please, Karen.
Okay, so this is a paper, sort of a response to Graham Priest about a year and a half ago, gave a paper at the Australasian Association of Philosophy on monism. And I'm an old-fashioned girl. I like Frege. So I'm defending Frege. There's a bit of history in this, and then a Fregean response to modern Meinongianism, and then a comparison between what Frege does and what Meinong does. So looking into historical Meinong, I came across this quote in Russell's review of Meinong on assumptions, which in some ways I think people will find a bit surprising. I found it somewhat surprising. Russell says that the object of thought, even when this object does not exist, has a being which is in no way dependent on its being an object of thought. All these are theses which, though generally rejected, can nevertheless be supported by arguments which deserve at least a refutation. Except Frege, I know of no writer on the theory of knowledge who comes as near to this position as Meinong. Now, I think this will strike people as a bit surprising, because I think that most of us think that Frege is not a Meinongian. Frege didn't think that that a non-denoting term, like the King of France or the President of the world, indicates something or refers to something. And in fact, he thought that non-denoting terms are no good in logic and we should avoid them. And so it seems as though he doesn't recognize non-existent objects as the reference of non-denoting terms. And so we tend to read on denoting as a refutation of Meinong, who includes non-existent objects, but as a kind of, a rethinking maybe of Frege. After all, Russell introduces variables, quantification. If you read a little bit more of Russell in the Principles of Mathematics and his discussion of Frege in the appendix, you'll see that probably what Russell had in mind were Frege's concepts as being objects of thought which have being even when they don't exist. Russell argued that you can't maintain Frege's distinction between objects and concepts for grammatical reasons, because whenever we try and talk about the concept, we use a singular term, so we're talking about an object. And Russell also rejected the other distinction that Frege has, that between sense and reference, or at least what he said in the Principles of Mathematics was that Frege's distinction was almost the same as his distinction between a denoting complex and what it denotes, and then on denoting, he says these are the same distinctions. And so I think that there's a sort of Frege-Russell that's come down to us, whereby, Frege's just Russell with a little bit of, a few things slightly different. Now, I'm going to go fully Fregean and give you an alternative, if you like, Meinongianism that depends on Frege. So why introduce non-existent objects? Here's some quotes from Crane. Well, clearly, some of the things we think about exist and some do not. And so we go from that to, okay, we can think about non-existent objects. And so we're committed to there being objects of which it's true that there are no such objects. And that doesn't look terribly good. But what Meinong does is that he solves this by introducing, well, actually two different distinctions, one between existence and Bestehen, and also a distinction between Sein and So-Sein. But Priest takes another view. He has two different domains of quantification, one of which doesn't have existential import and quantifies over everything, and the other which does, which quantifies over existing objects. Okay. Actually, although Routley is sort of thought of as, well, he's characterized by Priest as being the nonist. When you look at what he talks about, he doesn't actually talk about objects. He talks about items. And there is a sense in which you could see some of what Routley says as actually talking about Fregean concepts. So Frege has concepts, okay? Concepts are functions. And for Frege, when you are thinking of something that doesn't exist, and particularly when you're saying of something that it doesn't exist, you're saying of a concept that it's not instantiated. So there are these other things in the world. They're not just, I think, objects. There are functions, there are processes, there are thoughts, and there are concepts. And as Frege wants to say, concepts are not objects, okay? Concepts are functions. Think of the process of the ice caps melting. This is a process that you can actually describe using the function of the quantity of water or the amount of ice at a time, and you can characterize the melting of the ice cap over time by describing a function. And I don't think the function is an object. Okay, so they're not just objects. There are processes, functions, concepts, and thoughts. So Crane somewhere says that we have to recognize non-existent objects if we want to give a logic of our language, because we clearly talk about things that don't exist. I'm Fregean in the sense that I don't think that the syntax of natural language is a good guide to logical form. Indeed, if you've done baby logic, if you've done baby Frege, you know that this was really what Frege started off with. He said, well, look, just look at subject and predicate, syntactic form taken from the point of view of just natural grammar. And it looks as though, my child slept, Rip Van Winkle slept, someone slept, no one slept, subject, predicate, all the same logical form. But if you really were to take that as showing you, what you can infer, or what we would naturally infer from these things, from my child slept, I can go to, someone slept, but I can't go to someone slept from no one slept. That would be pretty silly. So Frege said, no, look, we are going to represent the syntax in a logical language somewhat differently, and we all do this. We now accept that someone slept is not FA, but there's something which slept, and we accept that no one slept is not FA, but it's not the case that there's someone who slept. And at the beginning of analytic philosophy, this new way of this new syntax of a logical language was taken to show that people like Heidegger and Sartre, who talked about nothing, were all completely deluded, and they ought to accept that you know, nothing exists is, you know, not a subject predicate sentence, but well, in fact, it's not the case that there is something. Well, you know, so you get air sort of saying, look, you know, just do it with quantification and negation, and you won't get this idea that nothing is an object of thought. Of course, now with the rise of modal logic, I guess everybody accepts that air was sort of wrong. And yeah, nothing, we can talk about nothing. It's an object and an object of thought. And so it's a presumably a non-existent object. Okay, so Frege himself, I think, actually is committed to the existence of nothing as an object. He has solved the problem of what we are doing when we deny the existence, say, of mermaids. Okay, he says that what we're doing is we're saying of a concept that nothing falls under it. But he, as we'll see, still accepts in some sense that when we speak about, well, that we can speak about nothing, and nothing is an object. After all, nothing for him ends up being the extension of the empty set. But one of the things that is interesting about Frege's logic is that, unlike the way in which we now think about propositional logic, Frege distinguishes within his logic between the thought expressed by a sentence and the assertion of that thought. And so one of the other things that he accepts is thoughts, okay, and it's thoughts that are judged to be true or false. So in his notation, you don't have a primitive existence idea. You have the universal quantifier, which says that, as you say, as you see here, it's explained as indicating the true or referring to the true. The sentence refers to the true. If for every argument, because we're now thinking about functions, the value of the function is the true and it's the false otherwise, and the existential sentence is the thought. Well, that's actually the assertion. Okay, so the vertical says that now we're asserting that it's the case that that it's not the case for every argument that X is not true of A. So because you're asserting that negation, then you're committed to there being some argument which makes the formula true. So Frege has solved the problem of, if you like, it's what you're saying when you're saying something doesn't exist. But you could say, well, look, he hasn't actually solved the problem of empty names. 2 says Rip Van Winkle slept. And he hasn't, so Frege, as I said to start off with, Frege looks as though he's not a Meinongian, because with a name like Rip Van Winkle, he says, well, that doesn't indicate anything, so we're not going to allow it in our logic. It's not a well-defined sentence. So if you like, Rip Van Winkle slept maybe is neither true nor false, or you shouldn't assert it. But that leaves him with a problem with Rip Van Winkle didn't exist, okay? Because clearly Rip Van Winkle didn't exist is true. And so what are we indicating with the name Rip Van Winkle in that sentence? And there's a solution to this. It's not actually explicitly in Frege, although maybe he toys with something like it. But the solution, and a lot of people have gone down this path, is to say, actually, once again, here we are in Rip Van Winkle didn't exist. Grammar is misleading in relation to logical form, and we should see this name in this kind of context as actually indicating a concept. So we've got, it's not the case that there's something which is Rip Van Winkle, where you can give some account of the concept of being Rip Van Winkle, which might be being the thing that is referred to by the name Rip Van Winkle in our language or something like that. So there's plenty of these people who've gone down some kind of path like that. Okay, so Frege's got solutions to what look like reference to non-existent objects like Rip Van Winkle. But as I said, he's still, I think, committed to referring to nothing. And this is a version of, if you like, Frege semantics comes from a letter to Husserl that he wrote, but it's also something that he used in his lectures when he was with the Carnap attended. Okay, so this is Frege has got the syntactic level, sentences, singular terms, concept words. Okay, and then he's got cognitive level, the sense of the sentences, which are thoughts, the sense of singular terms, the senses of concept words. And then he has ontological level, the Bedeutung, I like to translate Bedeutung as what is indicated, the Bedeutung of the sentence, which he says is a truth value, the Bedeutung of a singular term, which is an object, and the Bedeutung of a concept word, which is a function from objects to truth values. Okay? So what is indicated by a concept word is not a property, okay? It's not a set of objects. It's a function, correlation, a mapping from objects to truth values. But as you see, there's the true and the false, and these are the Bedeutungs of the sentences. And what is the false? Frege does treat the false as an object. He introduces these two objects, the true and the false, okay? And I want to say, well, what is the false but nothing by another name? And indeed, in the Grundgesetze, what Frege does is he identifies the false with the extension of the concept of being not self-identical. And the extension of the concept of not being self-identical is zero, okay? So zero, because he's trying to, in his account of the numbers, zero is an object. It's the number, zero. And so it's an object. So Frege didn't get rid of reference to nothing. Eyre was wrong. Frege accepts that nothing is an object, and it's an object of thought. And so he's on the same plane as Heidegger and Sartre. Okay, but I think that Frege should have done something else. He should have, if he had just tweaked, and I just want to tweak Frege a little bit, he should have said every true sentence indicates the true, the totality of what is, being, and all the false sentences fail of reference. It's a rather nice thing to do, because if you then go back, if you think about falsity as failure of reference, then you see why, if the singular term fails of reference, it leads to the sentence failing of reference, being false. And if the functional expression, if you don't have a well-defined function, then that doesn't have a reference. So in order to get to indicating the true, you need a singular term that indicates something that exists, a concept expression that indicates a nice sharp function from objects of truth values, and then you'll get either you indicate the true or you fail. So this is an interpretation of Frege as a kind of Parmenidean, like a soft Parmenidean. Okay, that's to say, it's an interpretation of Frege whereby you say, well, all the true sentences have this in common, they indicate what is. All the false sentences have this in common, they fail to indicate what is. It's not unlike Parmenides. He has a place for change, because change is change of truth value over time. So he doesn't have to accept the existence of nothing as an object. He can just say, when the empty concept applies to nothing, and it never indicates what is. Okay, so this is my interpretation of Frege, Frege's Meinongianism, and I think he does a much better job than Meinong. Okay, this is how, if you like, Frege's concepts, Frege's ideas map onto Meinong. Okay, so Meinong had ideal objects. He calls them ideal objects, and he says that they subsist, they bestehen, they hold, but they don't exist. Okay, and they're not real. They're not wirklich. Okay. Actually, Priest and Routley don't like the distinction between existence and bestehen, because in fact, what Meinong is talking about is the reality of relations, and they're sufficiently Fregean to have accepted that predicates single one-place functions, and relations are multi-place functions, and so you don't need this distinction between existence and bestehen. So the ideal objects for Meinong are these relations, but they're also Frege's thoughts, objectives, or states of affairs. And the other ideal objects for Meinong are abstract objects. Well, I'm not going to, well, you might ask me about abstract objects in my version of Frege, but we'll leave that because there's not a lot of time. The other thing that Meinong has is objects that don't exist at all. Okay, so the round square, which Meinong says have Nichtsein, and he distinguishes, as I said, Sein, okay, Sein from So-Sein. So the round square has Nichtsein, but the round square is round, is true, because of the So-Sein of the round square being round. Well, what does Frege say? Frege says, look, distinguish instantiation from the subordination of one concept to another. The round square is round, is ill-formed or false if it's read as a case of instantiation, because there is no round square, but it's true if you read it as a case of the subordination of one concept to another. Being a round square is subordinate to being round, rounded as square. So everything, well, so just very quickly, what are the being of Frege's entities which have being even when they're not instantiated? What kind of being do they have? Well, I want to say that they are meanings, that meanings are properties of words, properties. So concepts, right, are not properties. Properties are causal powers. Words have causal powers, okay? what Frege has done is that he's distinguished among the causal powers of words, those meaning relations which are indications of things in the world, and those meaning relations which are expressions of that you grasp when you grasp the meaning of the word and understand how it's to be applied. So you identify, if you like, the kind of being of these entities which have being, even when they're not instantiated, the concepts as a kind of property of words. And I think that actually when you work through this, okay, so I think this is a much better view than the nonism, partly because Priest has all these non-existent objects, but how on earth do you count them? Frege's objects have to, I think, well, certainly the objects at the bottom, the material objects are distinguishable and locatable in space-time, whereas the properties are located in the connection, in the relations between powers that are in the world. So we come to grasp the meanings of simple first-level concept expressions by being taught to use them to sort objects into those that do and do not have them, that do not fall out of the concept, in virtue of the properties that the objects have. We then construct these more complex concept expressions, the numerical concept expressions, so you've got simple complex concept expressions like red, more complex concept expressions like round, square, and then you've got the second order concepts where we learned to count collections of objects that fall under first level concepts. I think that this means that we should think of concepts as numbers as concepts, and that in the end, I'm going to say everything Meinong does, Frege does better, and Fregeans do everything better than nonists. So I might get shot down.
Guys, so then time for one question, comment, remark, clarification.